They say laughter is the best medicine, but what happens when the medicine becomes the poison? What happens when the very thing that saves you also destroys you? Today we're diving deep into one of the most complex characters ever written, Tyrion Lannister. The man who makes everyone laugh, but behind every joke lies a desperate soul begging to be taken seriously. You see, Tyrion isn't just the comic relief of Game of Thrones. He's a masterclass in psychological survival, a walking contradiction who uses his greatest strength as his most devastating weakness. And by the end of this story you'll understand why the funniest people are often the saddest, and how humor can become the most sophisticated prison we build for ourselves. Picture this. A baby is born into one of the most powerful families in Westeros, but he's different. He's a dwarf in a world that values physical perfection above all else. His own father looks at him with disgust, his sister wishes he'd never been born, and his mother dies bringing him into this cruel world. What does a child do when faced with such rejection? How does a mind so young learn to survive in an environment designed to crush it? Tyrion Lannister learned the most dangerous lesson a child can learn, that love is conditional, that acceptance must be earned, and that the only way to earn it is to make yourself useful. But how do you make yourself useful when you're seen as fundamentally useless? You become indispensable in the one way they'll allow, you become entertainment. The first time little Tyrion made his father laugh, something shifted in his brain chemistry. For just a moment, the disgust in Tywin's eyes was replaced by something that might have been approval. That moment became his addiction, his obsession, his entire identity. He learned that wit could turn contempt into tolerance, that cleverness could transform hatred into reluctant respect. But here's the thing about using humor as armor, it works too well. When you become known as the funny one, people stop seeing you as anything else. Your pain becomes punchlines, your vulnerability becomes material, and your genuine emotions get dismissed because surely you're just setting up another joke. Tyrion's mind became a weapon, sharp and cutting, always ready with the perfect comeback, the devastating observation, the self-deprecating comment that would disarm any attacker before they could strike. He learned to attack himself first, harder than anyone else could, because if you're already bleeding from your own wounds, other people's blows don't hurt as much. Watch how he introduces himself to new people. I'm Tyrion Lannister and I'm a dwarf. He says it with a smile, with confidence, making it a joke before anyone else can. He takes the ammunition away from his enemies by firing it at himself first. It's brilliant. It's devastating. It's slowly killing him from the inside. Every family dinner became a performance. Every political meeting became a stage. Every moment of his life became an opportunity to prove his worth through entertainment value. The boy who just wanted to be loved learned that love was too dangerous to ask for directly, but laughter. Laughter was safe. Laughter was achievable. Laughter kept him alive. But survival and living are two very different things, and Tyrion was about to learn that the hardest way possible. The mask of comedy is the heaviest mask to wear because you can never take it off in public. When you're known as the funny one, people don't want to see your sadness. They don't want to hear about your real problems. They want the entertainment you've promised them by existing in their space. And Tyrion? He delivered, every single time. Think about his relationship with Jaime. The one person in his family who showed him genuine affection, and even with Jaime, Tyrion couldn't help but perform. Their conversations are filled with jokes, quips, and clever observations. When does Tyrion ever just talk to his brother? When does he ever just be vulnerable without wrapping it in a punchline? The tragedy is that Tyrion's humor isn't fake, it's genuine, it's brilliant, it's part of who he is. But it's also a wall so high and so well constructed that even he can't climb over it anymore. He's trapped himself in a character, and the character is slowly suffocating the man. Look at his relationship with Shae. Here's a woman who claims to love him, not for his name, not for his money, but for him. And what does Tyrion do? He can't believe it. He can't accept it. He keeps waiting for the punchline, keeps looking for the angle because in his experience, love is always conditional, always temporary, always about what he can provide rather than who he is. When Shae tells him she loves him, he makes a joke. When she's tender with him, he deflects with sarcasm. When she tries to see past his defenses, he builds them higher. Because vulnerability is terrifying when you've spent your entire life being hurt every time you've shown it. The most heartbreaking part is watching him sabotage his own happiness. He pushes Shae away not because he doesn't love her, but because he loves her too much to trust it. He's learned that the people who get closest to him are the ones who hurt him the most, so he keeps everyone at arm's length with a constant stream of wit and wisdom. His intelligence became another barrier. People were intimidated by how smart he was, how quickly he could see through their lies and motivations. So he learned to make his intelligence palatable by wrapping it in humor. He became the wise fool, the jester who could speak truth to power because he made it funny enough that people could swallow it without feeling threatened. But here's what happens when you spend your whole life performing: you forget how to stop. You forget who you are when you're not being entertaining. You forget what your real voice sounds like when it's not delivering punchlines. Tyrion became so good at being what other people needed him to be that he lost track of what he needed for himself. And the loneliest part? The people around him loved his performance so much they never asked him to stop. They never said, "Tyrion, you don't have to be funny right now. You can just be sad. You can just be angry. You can just be human." Instead, they came to expect the entertainment. They came to demand it. His humor became his prison, and everyone else became his jailers, keeping him locked in a role he could never escape. The performance was killing him, but it was also keeping him alive. And that's the most dangerous trap of all, when your coping mechanism becomes your identity, and your identity becomes your cage. But every performer has their limits, and every mask eventually cracks. For Tyrion Lannister, that crack came when the one thing he'd always been able to rely on, his ability to talk his way out of trouble, finally failed him. The trial for Joffrey's murder was the moment when Tyrion's world collapsed in the most public way possible. Here he was, facing accusations of regicide, and his first instinct was still to make jokes. "I saved you," he tells the court about killing Joffrey. "I should get a reward." Even facing death, he can't help but perform. But something different happens this time. The audience isn't laughing. His wit isn't working. His cleverness isn't saving him. For the first time in his life, Tyrion faces a situation where being funny isn't enough, where being smart isn't enough, where being useful isn't enough. He's stripped of all his tools, all his defenses, all his armor, and he's left standing naked in front of a crowd that wants his blood. Watch his face during that trial. You can see the moment when he realizes that his entire survival strategy has failed. The humor that protected him as a child, the intelligence that made him valuable as an adult, the performance that kept him alive for decades, none of it matters now. He's just a man they want to kill, and all his jokes in the world won't change that. This is when we see the real Tyrion, possibly for the first time. Not the witty observer, not the clever manipulator, not the entertaining dwarf, just a man who's tired of pretending, tired of performing, tired of being what everyone else needs him to be instead of what he needs to be. "I wish I was the monster you think I am," he tells the court. It's not a joke. It's not clever. It's not performative. It's just pain, raw and honest and devastating. For once, he's not trying to make anyone laugh or think he's brilliant. He's just telling the truth about how it feels to spend your entire life being misunderstood, underestimated, and ultimately unloved for who you really are. The trial becomes his breaking point because it forces him to confront the fundamental failure of his survival strategy. He spent his whole life trying to prove his worth through entertainment and intelligence, but none of that matters when people have already decided what you are. They've decided he's a monster, and no amount of wit or wisdom will change their minds. This is the moment when Tyrion stops trying to be likable. He stops trying to be useful. He stops trying to make people comfortable with his existence. Instead, he embraces their perception of him. If they want a monster, he'll give them a monster. If they want someone to blame, he'll take the blame. But he won't do it with a smile anymore. The transformation is terrifying and beautiful and absolutely necessary. Because sometimes, the only way to break free from a prison is to burn it down, even if you're still inside it when the flames start. The humor dies that day in the throne room, but something else is born. Something darker, more honest, more real than Tyrion has allowed himself to be in years. When the trial ends and Tyrion is sentenced to die, something fundamental shifts in his character. The man who has spent his entire life talking his way out of problems, who has used wit and intelligence as shields against a hostile world, finally faces a situation where words aren't enough. And in that moment of absolute powerlessness, he discovers a different kind of power entirely. The escape from his cell should have been a moment of triumph. His brother Jaime, the one person who truly loved him, risks everything to set him free. It should have been a reunion, a moment of gratitude, a chance for the brothers to embrace before Tyrion disappears forever. Instead, it becomes the moment when years of suppressed rage finally explode. Jaime tells him the truth about Tisha, his first wife. The woman Tyrion thought was a prostitute paid to pretend to love him was actually just a girl who genuinely cared for him. The one real love of his life, destroyed by his father's cruelty and his own self-doubt. The revelation doesn't make Tyrion laugh. It doesn't inspire a clever comeback or a witty observation. It breaks something inside him that can never be repaired. For the first time in the series, we see Tyrion completely stripped of his humor. No jokes. No performance. No attempt to lighten the mood or deflect with cleverness. Just pure, undiluted rage at a lifetime of manipulation, humiliation, and emotional abuse. The funny man disappears entirely, replaced by something much more dangerous, a man with nothing left to lose. This is when Tyrion makes the decision that defines the rest of his character arc. Instead of escaping quietly, instead of disappearing into the night like a good little dwarf who's grateful for his freedom, he goes to his father's chambers. He goes to confront the man who created the monster, who turned love into performance and authenticity into a survival mechanism. The confrontation with Tywin is the anti-joke. There's no wit, no cleverness, no attempt to win through words. When Tyrion finds Shae in his father's bed, the woman who claimed to love him now literally in bed with his enemy, the last piece of his heart dies. The final proof that love was always conditional, always transactional, always about what he could provide rather than who he was. "I am your son," Tyrion tells Tywin. "I have always been your son." It's not funny. It's not clever. It's just a plea for recognition, for acknowledgement, for the love that was never freely given. And when Tywin rejects him one final time, when he calls Shae a whore with casual cruelty, Tyrion does something he's never done before. He stops talking and starts acting. The crossbow bolt that kills Tywin Lannister is the sound of Tyrion's prison door finally slamming shut, not trapping him inside, but locking the world out. He's no longer the performing dwarf, the wise fool, the entertaining Lannister. He's become exactly what they always said he was: dangerous, unpredictable, and free from the need for their approval. But here's the devastating irony. In finally becoming authentic, in finally acting on his real feelings instead of hiding them behind jokes, Tyrion becomes genuinely monstrous. The humor that imprisoned him also kept his darker impulses in check. Without it, without the need to be likable or useful or entertaining, he's capable of things that would have been unthinkable for the old Tyrion. The man who once used words to solve problems now solves problems with violence. The man who once deflected pain with laughter now inflicts pain without hesitation. The transformation is complete, the wise fool is dead, and in his place stands someone much more honest and infinitely more dangerous. This is the price of breaking free from psychological prison. Sometimes, when you finally stop pretending to be what others want you to be, you discover that what you really are is something they were right to fear. The cage wasn't just protecting the world from Tyrion, it was protecting Tyrion from himself. And now that cage is gone, and neither Tyrion nor the world will ever be the same. The death of the performing Tyrion reveals a truth that most of us spend our lives avoiding, that our coping mechanisms, the very things that keep us safe and functional, often become the bars of our own prisons. We build these elaborate personas, these carefully crafted versions of ourselves designed to be acceptable to others, and then we wonder why we feel so alone, so misunderstood, so fundamentally disconnected from the people around us. Tyrion's story is a mirror for anyone who's ever felt the need to be the funny one, the smart one, the useful one, anyone who's learned that love is something you earn through performance rather than something you deserve simply by existing. He shows us what happens when survival strategies become identity, when the mask becomes the face, when the performance becomes the prison. The tragedy isn't that Tyrion was born different, or that his family rejected him, or even that the world treated him cruelly. The tragedy is that he was so good at protecting himself that he forgot he was worth protecting. He was so skilled at making others comfortable with his existence that he never learned to be comfortable with himself. But there's something beautiful in his darkness, something liberating in his fall from grace. Because in finally stopping the performance, in finally refusing to be what others needed him to be, Tyrion discovers something that had been buried under years of jokes and cleverness: his own authentic voice. It's angry, it's bitter, it's sometimes cruel, but it's real. The most profound moments in later seasons aren't when Tyrion is being witty or clever, they're when he's being quiet. When he's sitting in silence, no longer feeling the need to fill every moment with entertainment. When he's thinking instead of performing, feeling instead of deflecting, being instead of becoming what the situation demands. This is what freedom looks like for someone who's been performing their entire life, not constant happiness or perfect relationships or universal acceptance, but the simple, revolutionary act of being genuinely themselves, even when that self is complicated, difficult, or hard to love. And maybe that's the lesson hidden in Tyrion's transformation. Maybe the point isn't to be the funniest person in the room or the smartest or the most useful. Maybe the point is to be the most honest with ourselves about ourselves, regardless of whether that honesty is convenient or comfortable for the people around us. The wise fool taught us that humor can be a weapon, intelligence can be a shield, and performance can be a prison. But he also taught us that authenticity is the only real freedom, even when, especially when, that authenticity comes at a cost. Because in the end, isn't it better to be genuinely disliked for who you are than falsely loved for who you're pretending to be? Isn't it better to face the world as yourself, flaws and darkness and all, than to spend your entire life hiding behind a mask that's slowly suffocating you? Tyrion Lannister stopped being funny the day he started being real. And maybe that's the most important joke of all, the one where the punchline is finally, after all these years, just the truth. The funniest people are often the saddest because they've learned to transform their pain into something palatable for others. They've become experts at making their suffering entertaining, at turning their trauma into material, at keeping others at just the right distance, close enough to provide an audience, far enough away to avoid real intimacy. But what happens when the comedy ends? What happens when the performer finally steps off the stage? What happens when someone who's spent their entire life making others laugh finally gives themselves permission to cry? That's when the real story begins. That's when the wise fool becomes just wise, just human, just real. And sometimes that's the most revolutionary thing of all. The prison of humor is the most sophisticated trap we can build for ourselves because it feels like freedom, feels like power, feels like control. But it's still a prison, and the only way out is through the very vulnerability that the humor was designed to protect us from in the first place. Tyrion Lannister's greatest joke was pretending that his pain was funny. His greatest wisdom was finally admitting that it wasn't. And his greatest tragedy was that it took a lifetime of performance to learn how to simply be. So the next time someone makes you laugh, remember, there might be someone behind that laughter who's forgotten how to do anything else. Someone who's become so good at entertaining others that they've lost track of how to simply exist as themselves. Someone who's built such a perfect prison of humor that they can't remember what life looks like outside the bars. The wise fool teaches us that the most dangerous prisons are the ones we build for ourselves, one joke at a time. But he also teaches us that it's never too late to stop performing and start living, even if the world isn't ready for who you really are underneath the mask. Because authenticity isn't about being comfortable or convenient or universally loved. It's about being real, being true, being yourself, even when, especially when, that self is too complex for easy categorization, too human for simple entertainment, too real for comfortable consumption. The performance ends when you decide it ends. The prison door opens when you decide to walk through it. And the wise fool finally becomes wise when they stop trying to make their wisdom funny and just let it be what it is, hard-earned, painfully honest, and absolutely, genuinely human. That's the real story of Tyrion Lannister. Not the dwarf who made everyone laugh, but the man who finally gave himself permission to stop. Not the performer who entertained the crowd, but the human being who chose authenticity over acceptance, truth over comfort, reality over the safety of the stage. And in the end, maybe that's not a tragedy at all. Maybe that's the most beautiful comedy of all, the one where the punchline is simply being yourself no matter what the audience thinks of the show.